Hey, welcome back to Echo the Story. If you've been following us along, we've been telling the story of God, and we called it Echo because it reverberates throughout history. As we get together today, it's really important to me that we understand is that we're starting the next story. It is truly that, the next story. But it is unique in the sense that is, in terms of our current Bible, it's called the New Testament. But why I'm saying it's significant is that it's one story, the story of God. So let's get into that story now. Echo the story, and we're going to be talking about the birth of Jesus. Well, here we are, and we're about to talk about Christmas. 400 years, not 4 decades, but 4 centuries, 400 years had passed since God had spoken to his people. We'd called them the Israelites or the Jews. They had been under the control of other nations for hundreds of years. They were now ruled by the Romans, the most powerful empire that had ever existed to that point. The Jews were still waiting. They were hoping for a king, one who would come to save them and lead them into victory. Finally, God sent an angel. But he sent an angel to a woman named Mary in the town of Nazareth. She was engaged to be married to a man named Joseph, who was a descendant of King David. You may remember King David from earlier on. The angel named Gabriel appeared to her and he said, "Don't be afraid, Mary. God has chosen to bless you. You will become pregnant and have a son, and you are to name him Jesus," which means God saves. He will become a king whose kingdom will never end. So Mary asked the angel, but how can I have a baby? I'm still a virgin." And the angel replied, "This will happen supernaturally. By God's Spirit. This baby will be called God's Son." Remember, nothing is impossible with God. Mary said, "I'm God's servant. May everything you have said come true." And after that, Mary sang to God, thanking him for choosing to bless her. And just as the angel had said, Mary became pregnant. Well, when Joseph found out, her betrothed husband, that she was expecting a child, he decided to break off their engagement quietly. The law would have permitted him to even have her killed for having an affair. But one night, Joseph had a dream. An angel appeared to him and said, "Joseph, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. The child in her is from God. You are to give him the name Jesus, for he will save the people from their sins." So Joseph took Mary as his wife, but he did not sleep with her until after the baby was born. Well, months later, as Joseph and Mary were traveling to Bethlehem, the time for Mary came to give birth. No rooms were available for them, as the local inns all had been filled up because of the census. They found a room in a stable, which is so hard to believe that there was a place for a baby to be born. She gave birth and they named him Jesus, meaning the one who saves. Just as the angel had told them, and it all came to pass. Mary wrapped her son in strips of cloth and he laid him in a feed trough. And that night a group of shepherds were out in the fields taking care of their sheep when an angel suddenly appeared to them, and they were so frightened. And the angel said, "Don't be afraid. I'm bringing you great news for everyone." He said, "The one who will save you, the Messiah, has been born tonight in Bethlehem. You'll know it's him when you find a baby in a stable wrapped in strips of cloth." Well, the shepherds said to each other, "Let's go to Bethlehem as fast as we can to see this miracle God told us about." And when the shepherds ran into the town, they found Joseph, Mary, and the baby in the stable, just as the angel had said. Well, after this, They went and told everyone what they had heard and seen, and the people were truly amazed. A few months later, wise men traveled from distant lands to find the newborn king. I know in our nativity sets we like to put the wise men in amongst the shepherds, but it really was a short time later. A star had guided them from the east to Bethlehem and stopped over the place where Mary and Joseph were living. As the wise men entered the house, they were overcome with joy, and they kneeled down and they worshiped Jesus. They brought him expensive gifts of gold, spices, and perfumes. And eventually, Mary and Joseph moved back to Nazareth, where Jesus grew strong, wise, and full of God's grace. When Jesus was 12 years old, he and his family attended the annual Passover festival in Jerusalem. Do you remember when we talked about the Passover festival? All in this long story, the story of God. Well, on the way home, Joseph and Mary assumed that Jesus was in their caravan, but traveling with some of the other relatives. Well, later, they stopped to sleep for the night and they realized he was nowhere to be found. In a panic, Joseph and Mary went back to Jerusalem to look for Jesus. 3 days later, they finally found him. And you know where he was? He was in the temple courts discussing, questioning all these topics with religious leaders. The teachers were amazed at his understanding and his insights. His parents really didn't know what to think. "Son," his mother said to him, "why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic and have searched for you everywhere." And Jesus, in his calm tone, said, "Why did you need to search? You should have known that I would be in my Father's house." But Joseph and Mary, they didn't understand what he meant. So Jesus returned to Nazareth, and his parents was obedient to them. He was obedient to his parents. His mother thought deeply about what had happened. Jesus grew up in both height and wisdom and was loved by God and everyone who knew him. That's the story of the birth of Jesus. Well, as we come back now and look at some of these questions, this is a very familiar story. But I really want you to take time to think about, maybe from a new or fresh perspective, of what's going on here. So what do we actually learn about Joseph and about Mary? I think there was something in there that Joseph was a descendant of someone very famous. Really cool line that we heard in there about Mary saying, "May it be so, I'm blessed." Like, we learned a lot of things, so check that out. I think it's pretty obvious, but just to remind ourselves and to look again, what was unique about Jesus' birth? Like, where was he born? The even fact of how his pregnancy and his birth came about. And why, and the next question ties in with that, why do you think it was so important for Jesus to be born by a virgin mother? We already talked about this. Who was Jesus a descendant of, and how might that be significant? And again, what we've tried every time in these stories, what else did you hear that remind you about what prophets said, or that we've heard in over and over again in some of these other stories through this? Well, like I said, you probably have heard this as the Christmas story, but I just want to encourage you to take time and look at these. These videos and these questions are posted on the website, so you don't have to do it right now. You can engage and join in this later, but I want to encourage you, constantly going in and digging deeper into the story of God. The birth of Jesus and these great questions today will help us understand more about the story.